Welcome to HeadlineBuster, brought to you by The Point with me, Lyu Xiang. In this series, I dissect stories that are making headline around the world and talk to my guests to compensate for the missing pieces of the puzzle. So join us in real time by sending us your comments or questions via the CGTN page on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or Weibo. If you're watching this live on the CGTN application, you can email me at thepointwithlx@cgtn.com. Let me know what you think. We start our live streaming every Friday at 11 a.m. Beijing time. Get in touch and we just might read out your comments. So before we go to today's topic, here are some comments that I've received on China-US relations. First, from Facebook, Ross C. Richardson Jr. He says, right now, I'm just ashamed of our current government. China is a great country, and I think Donald Trump is just jealous. All he cared about was winning the trade war and trying to get help from China to win the next election. Now it looks like he will lose unless he can find a way to cheat. So he's behaving like a toddler because he can't get his way. From Facebook, Ivy Huang, right now everything in U.S. is anti-China, so speechless for Trump and his administration. How could there be so many Americans who believe in them that being against China could help build America great? Work hand by hand is the only way to make America great again. I agree. Now, from Twitter, by Stephen Chen, to be honest, you guys don't know how to fight with Western, I guess, media, he means. You guys are spoiled by state media dominance. In China, you guys are privileged and never have to worry about surviving any competition. While Western media, they have to fight to death for survival, not at same level. Well, probably we don't have to fight for survival, but we have to compete with a very powerful Western media, don't you think? But this week, anyway, our attention will be on the COVID-19 coverage once again as the virus continues to ravage countries around the world. As of today, over 15 million cases have been reported around the world, and over 500,000 people have lost their lives. India, Brazil, the United States have been the hardest hit. Very sad. Given all the suffering, uncertainty and chaos, it's natural that all of us want to know why this is happening to us, when it's going to be over, and what, if anything, can be done to prevent anything from happening again like this. So, before we go on, I would also like to share with you some good news. For instance, a phase 2 trial of COVID-19 vaccine conducted in China has found that it is safe and induces an immune response, according to a new study published this week in the medical journal The Lancet. And a new vaccine developed by the University of Oxford also appears safe and effective. Meanwhile, after a fight against an outbreak last month, Beijing has not seen any new cases in more than 2 weeks. And Xinjiang's outbreak also seems to be under control, so fingers crossed. Now, given the common threat the world is facing, the economic damage, and most importantly, the lives at stake, international cooperation and communication is essential. As we say over and over again, finger pointing won't solve a thing. Unfortunately, not everyone agrees, which brings me to this week's topic. As I said, U.S. Congressman Michael McCaul, the top Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, who was assigned to lead the new China task force in May, released an interim report on June the 12th. The title, The Origins of the COVID-19 Global Pandemic, including the roles of the Chinese Communist Party and the World Health Organization. Let's call it the McCaul report for now. Now, it essentially accuses the Chinese government, along with the WHO, of covering up the pandemic at the early stage and obfuscating data. The report particularly elaborated how the Wuhan Institute of Virology, or WIV, played a suspicious role. The report argues that by responding in a transparent and responsible manner, the Chinese Communist Party could have supported the global public health response and shared information with the world about how to handle the virus, and that it is likely the ongoing pandemic could have been prevented had they done so, saving hundreds of thousands of lives in the world from an economic meltdown. Well, nothing new. We've heard such accusations all before. But behind the conclusion, there are just a few major flaws, namely factual inaccuracy, cherry-picking evidence, jumping to conclusions, and groundless information. For instance, the methodology. Given the McCaul report's 50 pages and over 200 footnotes, it is clear somebody had to do a lot of digging to come up with the so-called evidence and claims. If you actually look at the sources cited, however, you'll see a mix of official reports and data with a large number of international media stories. Now, these media stories have a place in the world, of course, but that place isn't and shouldn't be in an official congressional government report that is supposed to inform policies and bilateral relations. On page 5, the McCaul report claims currently the earliest case identified by the People's Republic of China authorities can be traced back to November 17, 2019. The cited source comes from a South China Morning Post article from March the 13th that says government records suggest a first person infected with new disease may have been a Hubei resident aged 55, but patient 0 has yet to be confirmed. No confirmation, remember, just a suspicion. There is the more serious question about the South China Morning Post article's source. An inquiring mind would ask, well, which government document is it referring to? The article says its assertion is based on government data seen by the paper, but that the government record have not been released to the public. So here we have a congressional report based on a news article, which is based on documents that can't be verified. When it comes to patient 0 and the virus's origin, there is a lot of information and misinformation floating around out there. And the McCaul report clearly jumped to conclusion using one convenient news article. The McCaul report also cobbles together circumstantial evidence to support its claims. On page 9 it says, on January the 3rd, the National Health Commission issued a nationwide order similar to the one put in place by the Hubei Provincial Health Commission, requiring that samples of the virus be destroyed, and that the CPC, or the Chinese Communist Party, refused to acknowledge that. It issued this order until May the 15th, 2020. So we went and checked. An official from the National Health Commission did react to this at a press conference on May the 15th. He said, based on comprehensive research and expert opinion, we decided to temporarily manage the pathogen causing the pneumonia as class 2, meaning highly pathogenic, and imposed biosafety requirements for collecting and transporting samples, experimenting, as well as destroying the samples. He added that not every lab across China met the national guidelines to handle such high-risk pathogens in samples, and those labs should indeed destroy samples or hand them over to labs that are certified to work with these samples. So hasn't the US or other countries been accusing Chinese labs of not being safe enough? So what China did should be encouraged, shouldn't it? The original meaning was lost in translation and viewed through a cynical lens. This warped interpretation becomes so often a tool to accuse China then by media and governments alike. Speaking of lab safety, the McCaul report contradicts itself. In the section entitled The Wuhan Institute of Virology, the report dredges up the tidal theory that the virus could have been leaked from a lab. On page 23, it says, while the broad consensus of the scientific and intelligence communities is that the virus is natural in origin, some experts have hypothesized that the SARS-CoV-2 leaked from the WIV through improperly handled material or infected staff. Others have been quick to dismiss these claims based on a low probability of such an event occurring. The report goes on to say, however, it is prudent to examine what is currently known about this institute, including the virus research that occurs at its 20 laboratories. So why is it prudent when it's just said that the scientific evidence and intelligence evidence suggests otherwise? Doesn't the word hypothesize mean it's only in theory? If there is evidence, it wouldn't be called a hypothesis. By the way, I talked to Dr. Shizheng Li, the famed coronavirus scientist who works in the lab. I asked her about this question, and she said the claim that the virus escaped or was leaked from the lab is just totally groundless because they never had this virus in their lab in the first place. Then there is the issue of cherry picking. The McCaul report plucks bits of information that supports its argument but ignores what doesn't, even from the exact same source. For example, the article cites remarks by Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, Director General of the WHO, at a COVID-19 virtual press conference on April the 20th, to back up McCaul's claim that Dr. Tedros was complicit in China's cover-up effort. But that very same transcript of that very same press conference also busted McCaul's claim that Taiwan first informed the WHO about human-to-human transmission in an email at the end of last year. In the same press conference, the WHO official cleared up any such confusion, saying, "We had a request from health authorities in Taiwan, and the message referred to news sources indicated at least 7 atypical pneumonia cases reported in Wuhan media. It was purely requesting relevant information and thanking us in advance for our attention to the matter." So, which bits of the same transcript did McCaul choose to pick? Whichever that supports his argument, apparently. Finally, there are some basic factual errors that need to be pointed out. The McCaul report claims the Director General of the Institute of Virology in Wuhan is Wang Yanyi, who joined the China Zhigong Party of the Chinese Communist Party of China in 2010. But the Zhigong Party is not part of the CCP. It's another party parallel to the CCP. Simple fact. The report also tries to suggest the military dimension, the potential military dimension of the Wuhan lab. On page 29, it mentions the PRC's military takeover of the lab. But this simply isn't true. The lab, or all the Level 4, biosafety Level 4 labs, are managed by the Chinese Academy of Sciences, not the Chinese military. On page 26, the report says, after the SARS-CoV-2 outbreak began, Yuan Zhiming was replaced on January 31st, 2020, in a possible fulfillment of concerns raised by the French Defense and Intelligence Services almost 2 decades earlier. He was succeeded by Major General Chen, the PRC's top biowarfare expert. Wow, sounds very sensational. But in fact, Yuan wasn't succeeded by Chen Wei. Yuan is still in the same position. And Major General Chen Wei is with another academy not located in Wuhan, and the Wuhan Institute of Virology has never been taken over by the military. So, the overall point is that I guess the US Congress can investigate whatever they believe is necessary and important, but it has to exercise due diligence. It has to exercise fairness and accuracy. We'll take a short break, and when I come back, I'll talk to my guests about how such a report was made, what it could be used for, and why it matters to take a good look at it. Stay with me.
Making sense of the overwhelming wave of information means cutting through the noise to shine a light on the heart of the story and making room for new perspectives. True understanding means the ability to see events from more than one side. I'm Lyu Xiang, and this is The Point.
Welcome back to Headline Buster, brought to you by Lyu Xiang. I'm in Beijing, and I'm pleased to introduce our panelists. They are Professor Chen Hong, Executive Director of the Asia Pacific Studies Center of East China Normal University. I'm also pleased to have Professor Josef Mahoney from East China Normal University, who's joining us from the United States. And we have Mr. Lyu Xiang, Research Fellow of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So we have an all-male panel today. It's great. So, yeah, we have this long monologue again, where I try to find out what's the problem with this McCaul report from our perspective. Professor Chen, let me go to you. Did I say something wrong just now? Because I busted, for instance, problems in the methodology, some basic factual errors, and the cherry-picking of evidence to support or ignore, the claims in this report. What is your reaction of my reaction to this report? Professor Chen.
Okay, so I think actually what you said was quite surprising. I think the so-called interim reports, which I read, is actually a pack of, as you said, misinformation and disinformation. The report that is full of unfounded and totally wrong information. It contains a lot of ambiguity, which is to deliberately mislead and misguide the public, governments, and also the international community.
Yeah. Joseph, watching from the United States, do you get what I'm saying? I mean, I'm trying to say, okay, you have the, the right to do an investigation and issue a report at your discretion. At the end of the day, nobody's going to tell U.S. congressmen what to do, what not to do. But in terms of how he comes to conclusion, we have a problem. What is your reaction?
Well, I think that your deconstruction of the report has been rather kind. I think he could have been a lot tougher on it. I think the first problem with the report is that it starts with its conclusion and then seeks, as you noted, information to support the political position that Mr. McCaul wishes to advance as a foot soldier for Donald Trump. Now, I think the thing that you might have also mentioned is that this report hinges on some very simple narratives, some very simple myths, some very simple misunderstandings about China, and it tries to build on and perpetuate those myths. The first, strikingly, is this idea that the Communist Party is this all-powerful monolith that should have been able to control all of these things and prevent this disease from spreading around the world, even though it didn't have all the information that we have now, and we're still unable to control it even in the U.S. So it's this idea that there's this all-powerful government that is evil in the eyes. That he's constantly using this sensationalist term. He never refers to the Chinese state. He never distinguishes between these different aspects of the Chinese state. It's always the Communist Party. The word communist is this dirty word in the United States. It goes back to the Cold War. And so this is the narrative, but this is the narrative that then gets layered on top of these other narratives. In other words, this is the narrative of China, which is perpetuating the United States, that this Communist Party is all-powerful, and yet they have to steal all of their ideas from us because they're so technologically incompetent, and yet they should have been able to prevent all of these problems and understood everything in the first place. So I'm much more interested in sort of how this perpetuates these bigger lies and misunderstandings and mischaracterizations of the Chinese system.
Yeah, you mentioned a very important point. By the way, thank you for pointing out that I've been kind, because I want to make them understand that our goal is not to vilify or to attack anybody. Really is to point out the flaws and say this is wrong what you said, and this is all we wanted to do, instead of to smear anybody or to fight back or anything, because the relationship is already very, very bad. So, Mr. Lyu, what is your reaction to such a report? And also, the idea that it's always the CCP, the CCP. By the way, the official name of the Chinese Communist Party is not the CCP, it's the Communist Party of China, it's the CPC, but it seems that's a very minor point at this moment.
Hi, Lyu Xiang. Actually, you have gone through the methodology and the details of this McCaul's report. It's not, in my mind, in my view, it's not only a misinformation effort, it's a disinformation against the Communist Party of China and the WHO. Its aim is to give an impression to the world that it's a failure of the Communist Party of China and the WHO together made this pandemic unstoppable. And the other aim is to cover up the current failure of the U.S. government in dealing with the pandemic. We know actually the American people a lot. They're suffering the fatalities, they're suffering from the sickness, and they're suffering the economic slowdown.
Why the repeated mention?
Yeah.
Why the focus on the Communist Party of China? Because we're not just seeing this from this report. We're also hearing constantly from Secretary Pompeo, for instance, wherever he goes,
yes.
he's singling out the Chinese Communist Party.
Yes, it's a new tactic on the U.S. side. This morning I got up very early and read Mr. Pompeo's speech. And together, yeah, Pompeo's speech and McCaul's report, if we see them together, actually they are a very well-concerted effort to vilify and smear the Communist Party of China. You know, the Communist Party of China is the leading party in China, and they are doing very well in governing the whole country, especially in this campaign against the virus. And now the U.S. is in a desperate situation. They want to point their fingers to the Chinese Communist Party, and that they can distract. They hope they can distract American people's attention to their own failure.
Let's take a look at this comment from Paolo Roberto. We should expect reports like that because we know what they did in Iraq, but times changed. Joseph, your reaction, what's the potential linkage of such a report on the origin of COVID-19 and accusation against the Chinese Communist Party versus what happened in Iraq many years ago?
Well, you know, I actually wrote a piece today where I was talking about this very incredible, hypocritical double standard that the United States applies to China in almost every respect. You may be following the news in the U.S. right now, but the mayor of Portland is suing the U.S. government because the Trump administration has sent federal agents in unmarked cars who are seizing people on the street and detaining them extrajudicially. These are peaceful protesters. And yet the United States accuses China of suppressing protesters. We know that the United States spies again and again and again, and yet it accuses China of trying to spy on vaccine data. Right? It was the Trump administration that decided to weaponize, the term was used, weaponize this outbreak, even to the point of declaring that, Trump himself declared, that this was a deliberate attack by China on the United States that eclipsed even the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. So these things have been taking place. The United States, what the United States has done against Muslims far exceeds even the worst charges that have been labeled against China in recent years. And, you know, there was this really interesting moment because now we have, of course, the FBI director who has been completely politicized in this in terms of the speech that he gave a couple of weeks ago at the Hudson Institute in New York. And this came out, he gave this speech 2 days before the United Nations released a report saying that the U.S. Killing of the Iranian general was unlawful, it was extrajudicial, and you know, and if you know how the UN works, the UN has to notify member governments when they're going to have some bad findings so the government can respond. And so 2 days before that, he's accusing China of this extraordinary rendition program, right, where China is trying to bring back people who have absconded with vast sums of money from corruption. And yet it was precisely the United States during the War on Terror that was running an extraordinary rendition program that was picking up people around the world, grabbing citizens even from allied countries and taking them to black sites and torturing them. So there's this incredible double standards. Every terrible thing that the U.S. has done, it turns around and accuses China of doing, and then it justifies its own behavior. In the meantime, it blames China for a disease and says that it did it on purpose, and that China should have, but at the same time China should have been able to control it, and yet we can't control it, right? I don't really understand how all this logic holds together in the mind of the typical American voter, except to say that most people simply aren't thinking very clearly about it. Most people are angry, and they're very excitable at this point, and too problematically, they want someone to blame.
Well, that's part of the reason why I don't want to be very, very sharp or too emotional or to be too cynical, because I know the temperatures are already very high. I just want to point out that there are unjustifiable claims made in such reports, which is just, you know, not fair to the party that you are trying to investigate. And finally, Professor Chen, there are people who would argue that, look, nobody is perfect. China also admitted that there are areas, or Chinese scientists at least also admitted there are areas where China can improve. Wouldn't it be helpful if countries talk about these, and if other countries, would assert a certain level of pressure on countries that are in the center of this, so that things can, be found out, truth can be found out, and future management can improve on the basis of such findings. So such reports actually could merit some legitimacy. Professor Chen, how would you react to that?
Well, definitely, I think actually China, for example, is actually encouraging the international investigation based on the WHO, and also it is conducted at the international scale. In other words, actually an investigation, a report is definitely necessary, but the purpose of this report, this McCaul report, definitely is a malicious attempt to attack China. There are a lot of misplacements contained in the reports, like the sequence of dates, the actual facts, and there are also distortions of incidents. So Mr. McCaul actually has been repeating such lies on a number of occasions, quoting from this report, orchestrated by himself and his followers. I think actually the China-U.S. relations are in an unprecedented crisis, which is actually the outcome of such constant virulence and malevolent attempts by Mr. McCaul and his followers. I don't think there's any possibility to reason with such people, as the proverb says, that you can never wake someone who pretends to be asleep. So when the true purpose of those anti-China hope is to suppress and crush China, that is the worst of human nature, the most, I think, side of human nature.
I think there is an international consensus, and it's shared by China, that what happened in the early stages of this pandemic response have to be found out, but it has to be done in a comprehensive review, and it has to be a non-political and neutral process. Meanwhile, the scientific study about the origin of the virus also has to be carried out, but led by scientists, not by politicians. So let's draw those lines. Anyway, I wish if there is this opportunity, we could sit down and talk to these U.S. congressmen, see what exactly is on their mind. I hope they don't mean bad. Again, I hope they don't mean bad. But I think it is worth to give it a try, to talk to them. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Anyway, many thanks to my three guests, Professor Chen Hong, Josef Mahoney, and Mr. Lyu Xiang. And many thanks to all of you who have been following us on this edition of Headline Buster, both on the new media platforms and on TV. I'll join you next Friday at the same time on the same platforms. Thank you very much for having followed us. Follow me also, again, as always, through The Point with Alex on my Twitter account. This is the only official account I have at this moment, no other account. So don't believe anybody when they say, hey, I'm Lyu Xiang, follow me or listen to me. That's just not the case. Okay? See you next week.